What happened behind the scenes? We had Mugabe really resisting, saying that he wanted to remain the president. And then all of a sudden, as the impeachment debate began, we have news of his resignation. You, as an analyst on Zimbabwe, you're from that country, you study this. What are your thoughts? And we're only presuming, but what are your thoughts on what really happened behind the scenes?
So I think the first thing to know about Robert Mugabe is that he's a stickler for rules and regulations. So the first act in which the military intervened, that's something that he could negotiate because he could tell them, and he did hint at it in his speech, that their actions were not constitutional, their actions were illegal. And so he was really betting on the legality of what the military had done. I think for a while, he did not anticipate that the Mnangagwa faction would push for a more legal constitutional direction to impeach him. I'm not sure that that was on the table in the beginning. They were negotiating with him. But I think negotiating with Robert Mugabe when you're not sure that you want to impeach him is a problem because he's smarter than most people and he understood the Constitution in ways that I think his foes didn't until much later on Saturday and Sunday. And my understanding is that when all of this was happening, there was an assumption, an expectation that he would have given up power on Wednesday following military intervention at the state broadcasting. So I think a lot of it really had to do with legalese and the laws and how the laws work in Zimbabwe. So while a lot of people talk about Zimbabwe being this dictatorship, a failing state, it's a state with very strong institutions. I mean, Zimbabwe has got the highest level of education on the African continent. It's a country that's governed by laws. And so once it went to parliament, I think Robert Mugabe realized, I don't have any options anymore because he knew how impeachment would work. He knew how the votes would go. But a coup is something that he could definitely negotiate and get out of.
And now just looking at the man likely to succeed him, Mnangagwa, what do you make of him? What kind of presidency can we expect? And also bearing in mind that over these previous decades, he really has been a right-hand man of Mugabe.
Yes, so a lot of us were watching Mnangagwa's first speech coming into the country. And I'll say that frankly, a lot of people were disappointed, not just myself. It was not a conciliatory speech. I think most of us expected a speech that said, hey, Zimbabweans, let's come together. We've just been through the most horrendous experience. But he also said some really good things. He said that we're looking forward to working with the international community. We're looking forward to bringing back jobs. We're looking forward to rebuilding the economy. I'm yet to figure out what kind of democracy his version will be. Because as you rightly point out, he's been the right-hand man for Robert Mugabe as far back, as August, he was talking about Robert Mugabe, a 93-year-old, standing for presidency in Zimbabwe. So it's going to be very interesting for him to redefine what it means to be democratic, what it means when in his speech, he said, down with the enemy. That's a phrase that he repeated multiple times today. And down with the enemy is the same phrase that Grace Mugabe used against him just 2 weeks ago. So that's going to be very interesting.
And will he be able to shake off, this mantle of being so close to Mugabe?
I don't think they can. So one of the policies that he just talked about this afternoon was command agriculture. This is a policy that was first introduced, at least Grace Mugabe claimed credit for it. She said she was the designer of command agriculture. And so a lot of their policies, and I mean, agriculture is straight out of Robert Mugabe's playbook. It's going to be interesting to see how they deal with the land issue. Most Zimbabweans don't want the land reform processes reversed. But if he wants to engage with Britain, if he wants to engage with the Americas, he's going to have to rethink, how do you talk about land reform? How do you engage Westerners and still keep the core promises to the war veterans that they can keep the land? Are they going to be taking land away from people in the other ZANU-PF faction? But I think what stood out and what was really missing from his speech is extending a hand to people like Morgan Tsvangirai, who've been on the trenches of Zimbabwean politics for so long. So I've written about opposition weakness. And even in my writing, I've also emphasized that the structure of the state made it very, very difficult for the opposition to be engaged in politics. Mnangagwa didn't come in because of the people only. He came in because the military essentially said, you're now allowed to march, right? In the past, when people have organized organic marches by themselves, the military and the police have clamped down on that. So he came in because he had the support of the military, allowing him to march. But then he doesn't mention anything about civil society, which mobilized people. He doesn't mention anything about the other opposition parties who mobilized people who've been fighting and saying Robert Mugabe must go for a long time. We've got activist Itai Dzamara who's still missing, and he's missing because he was carrying a placard that said Robert Mugabe must go. And this is the same thing that the military and now Emmerson Mnangagwa are saying, and they've become heroes. And yet Itai Dzamara is still missing. So I think he really has to rethink what he means about democracy. Does that mean that people like myself, political analysts, political scientists, journalists, we can say what we think about the state of the country without fearing for our lives, you know? So I've never feared for my life in Zimbabwe, but I know that journalists have been routinely intimidated. And as an academic, you know, I've been somewhat protected from that. But I think he really needed to send a strong message and say, hey, journalists, you are welcome to say what you think in your country. Activists, you are welcome to point out when I've gone wrong. But that said, you know, I am hopeful he still has Friday to, at least in the coming days, we're not sure when, he'll give his official speech and say, I am the new president of Zimbabwe, and this is what I plan to do for every single Zimbabwean. So he still has time, and perhaps we're being a little bit harsh. It was his first speech. He's just come back from 16 pretty painful days from what he said, fearing for his life. He's a man who was poisoned in October and airlifted. So he's going through a lot. So, you know, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that there are many, many emotions, but he should be aware that Zimbabweans are now impatient for democracy. They are very, very impatient. They want democracy now.
And Chipo, just finally, did you ever imagine that you would be talking about the resignation of Robert Mugabe, the downfall of him, before, and even he said it, he would leave office when he dies? Did you ever imagine you would see this day?
Not really. And I hope my mom watches this because she was teasing me just last week that she's seen 3 leaders in Zimbabwe and I've never seen another president in Zimbabwe. I was born 5 years after independence, so I couldn't imagine a country without Robert Mugabe. On Twitter, I put a post that asked people to tell me their favorite Robert Mugabe statements. And towards the end of the day, I was getting a lot of messages of people asking, well, what's going to happen now that he's gone? So I think none of us really expected him to go. In fact, when he didn't resign on Monday, that's more of the Robert Mugabe that we would have imagined. And so people started making jokes. Most of them were kind jokes, but I think there was a false comfort in living in an authoritarian regime where you are so afraid to think of possibility. After 2008, when we thought Morgan Tsvangirai had won, and I remember myself and friends being so excited only to be disappointed. A lot of us did not think that today would come. So I'm still in shock. I don't know. I'll start processing it next week. I'm very much in shock.